The hallway outside the community center's performance room buzzed with nervous energy. Lin Wei sat alone on a folding chair, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on her lap. Her dark hair fell across her face as she stared at the floor, trying to calm her racing heart. The old wooden bench creaked beneath her weight every time she shifted. Lin had been playing piano since she was 5, but almost nobody knew how good she really was. For 12 years, she had kept her talent mostly to herself and her grandfather, who had taught her everything she knew. The ancient upright piano in his small apartment had been her safe space, a place where she could express feelings she couldn't put into words. 10 minutes until we start, called Mrs. Chen, the event organizer, her voice cutting through Lin's thoughts. Lin looked up and nodded, trying to hide the panic that threatened to swallow her whole. She hadn't planned to be here today. Not at all. This was supposed to be Zoe's spot. Confident, experienced Zoe who never missed a note and loved the spotlight. But Zoe had come down with the flu 2 days ago and somehow Lin had gotten pulled into this mess. "You'll be fine," said a voice beside her. Lin jumped slightly and turned to see Mr. Reyes, her school music teacher, holding 2 cups of water. He handed one to Lin and sat down next to her. "It's just a simple piece, remember?" "Just the introduction for the choir." 4 minutes tops." Lin took a small sip of water, her throat tight. "What if I mess up?" Mr. Reyes smiled kindly. His eyes crinkled at the corners behind his glasses. "Then you keep going. That's all any musician can do." He glanced at his watch. "I should check on the choir. They're more nervous than you are, believe it or not." As Mr. Reyes walked away, Lin pulled out her phone and reread the last text from her grandfather. "Music is not in the fingers, little sparrow. It's in the heart. Let yours speak today." Lin smiled sadly at the screen. Her grandfather couldn't be here today. His health had taken a bad turn last month, and the stairs at the community center were too much for him now. She wished more than anything that he could see her play. He was the only one who truly understood what music meant to her. "Lin, can you come here for a second?" Mrs. Chen waved from the doorway to the main hall, her face tight with worry. Lin stuffed her phone in her pocket and hurried over. Through the crack in the door, she could see the audience filing in. Way more people than she'd expected for a small community show. Her stomach twisted into a tighter knot. "We have a problem," Mrs. Chen whispered, pulling Lin aside. "Dr. Phillips, the choir director, just called. He's stuck in traffic and might not make it in time for the opening number." "Oh," Lin said, not sure why this information was being shared with her. "I need to ask you a huge favor," Mrs. Chen continued, her eyes pleading. "Instead of just the introduction, would you be willing to play a full piece? Something to buy us some time while we figure out what to do about the choir?" Lin's eyes widened. "A full piece? But I only prepared the introduction. Anything you know well enough to play without much practice. Something simple, of course." Mrs. Chen patted Lin's arm. "You'd be saving the show." Before Lin could answer, the door to the performance hall opened wider, and she caught a glimpse of a man in a suit placing a small sign on one of the front row seats. The sign read, "Reserved Dean Wong, State University Music Department." Lin felt her blood turn to ice. The university scout was here, the one everyone had been whispering about for weeks. The one who could hand out full scholarships on the spot if he was impressed enough. "I can't," Lin whispered, taking a step back. "I'm sorry, I can't do it." Mrs. Chen's face fell. "I understand. It's a lot to ask." She sighed and turned to leave, already scanning the room for someone else to save the day. Lin watched her go, guilt and relief battling inside her chest. Then her phone buzzed with a new message. Her mother. "Grandpa's asking if you played yet. He's very excited." Something shifted inside Lin. Her grandfather had given her so much, not just music lessons, but confidence when she had none, purpose when she felt lost. He believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. And now he was lying in a hospital bed, proud of her for doing something she was about to back out of. "Mrs. Chen, wait," Lin called, her voice stronger than she expected. "I can play something else, a piece I know well." The relief on Mrs. Chen's face was immediate. "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. But it has to be the piece I choose," Lin added quickly. "And I'll need a minute to prepare mentally." Of course. Anything you need." Mrs. Chen checked her watch. "We start in 5 minutes." Lin nodded and retreated to a quiet corner. She closed her eyes and pictured the piece she would play. a simple Chopin nocturne her grandfather had taught her years ago. She had played it so many times she could feel every note in her bones. It wasn't flashy or technically impressive, but it was honest. It was her. The 5 minutes passed in a blur. Soon Lynn found herself being ushered to the side of the stage. The heavy velvet curtains blocked her view of the audience, but she could hear the murmur of voices growing louder as more people arrived. "Remember, just keep it simple," Mr. Reyes whispered as he passed. "No need to show off. Just get through it." Lynn nodded, but a small part of her bristled at the words. Keep it simple. That's what everyone always told her. Don't aim too high. Don't draw attention. Stay in your lane. Mrs. Chen stepped onto the stage, her voice bright with forced cheerfulness as she welcomed everyone to the annual talent showcase. Lynn barely heard the words over the pounding of her own heart. "And now, opening our program today, please welcome Lin Wei on piano." Lynn's legs felt like they were moving through water as she walked onto the stage. The grand piano waited in the center, its polished surface gleaming under the lights. It was much nicer than anything she'd ever played before. Certainly better than her grandfather's, old upright with the sticky keys and the slightly out-of-tune middle section. The spotlight found her as she sat down on the bench, and for a moment Lynn was blinded. She couldn't see the audience, couldn't see the university scout, couldn't see the exit signs that part of her desperately wanted to run toward. All she could see was the keyboard in front of her. She placed her hands on the cool keys and took a deep breath. The room fell silent, waiting. In that silence, Lynn could almost hear her grandfather's voice. "The piano is just wood and wire until you give it your soul." Lynn's fingers trembled slightly as she began to play the first notes of the nocturne. The sound filled the room, clear and sweet. She had played this piece 100 times before, but never like this, never with other people listening, never with so much at stake. The first few measures were shaky, her nervousness showing in the hesitation between notes, but then something strange happened. As the familiar melody flowed from her fingers, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. The audience, the scout, even her own anxiety, all of it receded until there was nothing left but the music. Lynn closed her eyes and let herself fall into the piece. Each note led naturally to the next, like stepping stones across a stream. She felt her body relax, her breathing deepen. This was the feeling her grandfather had tried to describe to her. This sense of becoming one with the music, of the boundaries between player and instrument dissolving. As she reached the middle section of the nocturne, where the melody grew more complex and emotional, Lynn found herself adding small changes, a slight emphasis here, a gentle slowing there, making the piece her own in ways she'd never dared before. The piano responded to her touch like a living thing, the notes ringing out clear and true. When the final notes faded away, Lynn opened her eyes, suddenly aware again of where she was and what she'd done. For a moment there was complete silence. Had she made a mistake? Had she embarrassed herself? Then the applause began, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. Lynn stood shakily and gave a small bow, her cheeks burning. As she turned to leave the stage, she caught sight of Mr. Reyes standing in the wings, his mouth slightly open in surprise. "That wasn't simple," he said as she reached him. "I'm sorry," Lynn began, but he shook his head. "No, don't apologize. That was..." He seemed to be searching for the right word. "That was real music." Before Lynn could respond, Mrs. Chen rushed over, her face flushed with excitement. "Lynn, that was wonderful. Dr. Phillips just called. He's still stuck in traffic and won't make it for at least another half hour." She lowered her voice. "The choir isn't ready to perform without him. Would you possibly consider playing one more piece? Something a bit longer this time?" Lynn glanced back at the piano, still sitting in the spotlight. She thought about saying no. She had done what she'd promised, played a simple piece to fill some time. She could walk away now, go back to being invisible. But somewhere in the back of her mind she could hear her grandfather's gentle laughter. "Why hide a light under a basket?" he would ask when she shied away from playing for others. "Music is meant to be shared." Lynn took a deep breath and nodded. "I can play something else." And as the words left her mouth, she knew exactly what piece would come next. Not something simple, not something safe, but something that truly came from her heart. Lynn stood in the wings, her heart still racing from her first performance. The applause had faded, but the feeling of connection with the music lingered. Mrs. Chen had hurried off to make announcements while the organizers scrambled to fill the time until Dr. Phillips arrived. That was really something, said a voice behind her. Lynn turned to see May, a violinist from her school orchestra. I didn't know you could play like that. Lynn shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just something my grandfather taught me. Well, it was beautiful. May squeezed her arm before rushing off to help with the program adjustments. Lynn pulled out her phone to text her mom about what had happened, but before she could, a commotion broke out near the entrance to the backstage area. She looked up to see Mr. Reyes and Mrs. Chen in what appeared to be a heated discussion with a tall woman Lynn didn't recognize. Is everything okay? Lynn asked as Mr. Reyes approached, running a hand through his thinning hair. Not exactly. He sighed. That was Ms. Nguyen, the superintendent's assistant. Apparently, the superintendent decided to attend tonight. And she's brought some important guests, donors for the new arts program. Oh, Lynn said, not understanding why this information was being shared with her. They're expecting a full program, Mr. Reyes continued, and with Dr. Phillips stuck in traffic and half our performers not ready yet. He looked at Lynn with an expression that made her stomach drop. Mrs. Chen may have mentioned that we have a talented pianist who could perform a special extended piece. Lynn's eyes widened. But I can't. It would just be one more piece, Mr. Reyes said quickly. Something to keep the audience engaged while we sort everything out. Maybe 10 minutes tops? 10 minutes? Lynn's voice rose slightly. That's not just filling in anymore. That's being the main act. Mr. Reyes glanced over his shoulder at Mrs. Chen, who was watching them expectantly. I know it's asking a lot, but you've already proven you can do this. That nocturne was lovely. That was different, Lynn protested. That was something I've played 1,000 times. I don't have anything else prepared that would fill 10 minutes. A new voice joined the conversation. What about your own music? Lynn turned to see Grandma Wong, the elderly woman who ran the community center's weekend art programs. Lynn hadn't realized she was listening. My own? Lynn trailed off, feeling exposed. How did Grandma Wong know about her compositions? The older woman smiled gently. Your grandfather mentioned them to me. He said you write beautiful music but never share it. Lynn felt her cheeks burn. It was true. She had been composing her own pieces for years, filling notebook after notebook with melodies and harmonies that no one but her grandfather had ever heard. The idea of playing one of her compositions in front of an audience, especially one that included the university scout and now the superintendent, made her feel physically ill. I can't, she whispered. Those are personal. They're not ready for people to hear. Grandma Wong nodded understandingly. Of course. It was just a thought. Mr. Reyes checked his watch. We need to decide quickly. Mrs. Chen is about to go back on stage to announce the next part of the program. Lynn closed her eyes briefly, wishing she could disappear. This was exactly why she preferred to stay in the background. No pressure, no expectations, no chance of public failure. But now somehow she had become the center of attention. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. Grandpa's asking how it went. He's so proud of you already. Lynn stared at the screen, torn between the desire to retreat and the memory of her grandfather's unwavering belief in her. He had always said music was meant to be shared, that keeping it locked away was like hiding a piece of your soul. I'll play again, she said finally, looking up at Mr. Reyes. But not one of my compositions. I'll do a medley of classical pieces. I can improvise connections between them to make it flow. Relief flooded Mr. Reyes's face. Thank you, Lynn, that sounds perfect. Mrs. Chen hurried over, her clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. What's the plan? The superintendent is getting restless. Lynn will play an extended medley, Mr. Reyes informed her. It should buy us at least 10 minutes. Wonderful. Mrs. Chen made a note on her clipboard. I'll announce you right away. Wait, Lynn said, suddenly panicking. I need a minute to think, to plan which pieces. Of course, Mrs. Chen nodded distractedly. 2 minutes enough? Great. She hurried back toward the stage before Lynn could respond. Lynn turned to Mr. Reyes, her eyes wide with fear. I can't just go out there without any preparation. Yes, you can, he said firmly. I've watched you practice during lunch breaks when you thought no one was listening. You know dozens of pieces by heart. Trust your instincts. Lynn took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. What pieces could she string together? How would she transition between them? What if her mind went blank under the pressure? Here. Grandma Wong said, pressing a bottle of water into Lin's hands. "Drink and remember to breathe." Lin took a small sip, grateful for the kindness. "Thank you." The sound of Mrs. Chen's voice came from the stage, introducing Lin as a remarkable young pianist who will share a special medley of classical favorites. There was polite applause. "You'll be amazing," Mr. Reyes whispered, giving her a gentle push toward the stage. Lin's legs felt like lead as she walked back into the spotlight. The grand piano seemed both welcoming and intimidating as she sat down on the bench again. This time, her eyes had adjusted enough to make out faces in the audience. She could see the superintendent in the front row, sitting next to a man who must be Dean Wong from the university. Their expressions were expectant, curious. Lin placed her hands on the keys, her mind racing through possibilities. What should she play first? Something familiar and comfortable to ease into the performance. Her fingers found the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune, almost of their own accord. The delicate, dreamy melody filled the hall, and Lin felt herself relaxing into the music she knew so well. As she played, a plan began to form in her mind. From Debussy, she could transition to Chopin, then perhaps to Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata for contrast. The pieces began to arrange themselves in her head like pieces of a puzzle, each flowing naturally into the next. When she reached the end of Clair de Lune, instead of stopping, she subtly shifted the final chords, morphing them into the introduction of Chopin's Raindrop Prelude. A few people in the audience murmured in appreciation at the smooth transition. Lin kept her eyes on the keys, focusing entirely on the music, letting it carry her forward. Time seemed to stretch and compress around her. She moved from piece to piece, adding her own flourishes and transitions, creating something new from these familiar works. The more she played, the more confident she became, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm, her expression changing with the mood of each piece. As she launched into a section of Beethoven's Pathétique Sonata, Lin became aware of movement at the back of the hall. She glanced up briefly and saw a tall, bearded man slipping into the room. Dr. Phillips finally arrived. Relief washed over her. Soon this unexpected solo would be over. The choir would take over and she could retreat back into anonymity. But as she prepared to bring the medley to a close, a strange feeling came over her. For the first time in her life, Lin didn't want to stop playing. There was something liberating about this improvised performance, about following her instincts rather than a rigid score. She was no longer just reproducing notes written by long-dead composers. She was creating something of her own in real time. As she transitioned into what she planned to be her final, here's a gentle rendition of Schubert's Ave Maria, Lin noticed Dr. Phillips speaking urgently with Mrs. Chen at the side of the stage. Something was wrong. The choir director's gestures were apologetic, his expression distressed. Mrs. Chen caught Lin's eye and made a subtle, keep-going motion with her hand. Lin nodded almost imperceptibly and extended her performance, adding more variations to the Schubert piece, drawing it out while trying to maintain its beauty and integrity. When she finally brought the medley to a close nearly 15 minutes after she had begun, the audience erupted in enthusiastic applause. Lin stood and bowed, her legs shaky but her heart strangely light. As she made her way off stage, Mrs. Chen met her with a worried expression. "You were wonderful, truly wonderful, but we have a problem. Dr. Phillips lost his voice completely on the drive here. Laryngitis. The choir can't perform without a director." Lin stared at her, understanding slowly dawning. "So what happens now?" Mrs. Chen bit her lip. "The superintendent is expecting a full program, and we promised the university representative would hear our best students." She took a deep breath. "Would you consider performing again? Not right away. After the intermission, something special." Lin looked past Mrs. Chen to where Dr. Phillips was apologetically explaining the situation to the choir members, their faces falling with disappointment. Beyond them, she caught sight of Grandma Wong watching her with knowing eyes. "Something special," Lin repeated quietly, an idea forming in her mind, something she had never dared before, something her grandfather had always encouraged her to do. "Yes," she said finally, meeting Mrs. Chen's gaze. "I think I can do that." The small backstage room buzzed with whispered conversations as performers and organizers tried to salvage what remained of the program. Lin sat alone in a corner, her fingers tapping an invisible keyboard on her knees. In her mind, she was sorting through her compositions, trying to decide which one might be suitable for public performance. She had never intended for anyone to hear these pieces. They were private expressions of her thoughts and feelings, musical diaries that she'd kept hidden for years. The idea of sharing them made her feel both terrified and strangely excited. "Everything okay?" Grandma Wong appeared beside her, offering a paper cup of jasmine tea. Lynn accepted it gratefully. "I think I'm going to play one of my own compositions after the intermission." Grandma Wong's eyes lit up. "Your grandfather will be so proud." "That's if I don't completely fall apart," Lynn replied, blowing gently on the hot tea. "What if everyone hates it? What if I forget parts in the middle? I've never performed any of them before, they only exist in my notebooks and in my head." Grandma Wong settled into a chair beside her with a soft grunt. "You know, when I was about your age, I was a dancer. Had the chance to perform a solo at a big competition once." Lynn looked up, surprised. She had always known Grandma Wong as the kind but stern administrator who kept the community center running smoothly. It was hard to imagine her as a young dancer. "Did you do it?" Lynn asked. "No." Grandma Wong's face grew thoughtful. "I was too scared. Told myself I wasn't ready, that my choreography wasn't good enough." She sipped her own tea. "It's been 62 years, and I still wonder what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to try." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of those words settling around them. "Which piece are you considering?" Grandma Wong finally asked. Lynn hesitated. "There's one I've been working on for almost a year. It's the most personal one, inspired by my grandfather's stories about growing up during difficult times and finding beauty even then." "That sounds perfect." Lynn nodded slowly. "But I've never played it straight through. Parts of it are still only in my head." "Sometimes the most beautiful music is the kind we make in the moment," Grandma Wong said. "Like jazz, full of improvisation and heart." Before Lynn could respond, Mrs. Chen appeared, looking frazzled but determined. "Lynn, we've shuffled the program. After intermission, we'll have the speech competition winners, then the violin quartet, and then you'll close the show." She checked her clipboard. "You'll have about 20 minutes, if that's all right. The superintendent seems quite impressed with you already." 20 minutes. Lynn's stomach tightened. Her composition was maybe 7 minutes long, even with all the repeating sections and variations. She would need to expand it considerably or play something else as well. "That's fine," Lynn heard herself saying, though inside she was panicking. Mrs. Chen looked relieved. "Wonderful. Oh, and Dean Wong from the university has specifically asked to speak with you after the show." As Mrs. Chen hurried off, Lynn turned to Grandma Wong with wide eyes. "Dean Wong wants to talk to me? The scholarship person?" Grandma Wong smiled knowingly. "Your playing made quite an impression, I think." Lynn's phone buzzed with another message from her mother. "Grandpa insists on hearing everything when you get home. Says he can tell from my updates that something special is happening." Something special? Yes, Lynn thought. That was exactly what was happening, though not in the way anyone had planned. She had come here expecting to play a few simple notes in the background and then disappear. Instead, she was about to bare her soul through music she had never intended to share. The intermission passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Lynn found a quiet corner and a pencil, quickly jotting down the structure of her composition in a small notebook she always carried. She hummed sections to herself, fingers moving in the air as she worked out transitions and expansions to the piece. 5 minutes till we start again," Mr. Reyes announced, poking his head into the room where performers were gathered. Lynn nodded, closing her notebook. She felt strangely calm now, as if having made the decision to share her music had lifted a weight she hadn't known she was carrying. The second half of the program began. Lynn watched from the wings as the speech competition winners delivered their carefully rehearsed orations. They were followed by the violin quartet, 4 girls from the high school performing a lovely arrangement of a folk song. The audience responded warmly to both performances, but there was a distinct sense of anticipation in the air. Word had spread about the remarkable young pianist who had already performed twice. "You're up next," Mrs. Chen whispered, appearing at Lynn's side. "Are you ready?" Lynn took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." Mrs. Chen squeezed her arm encouragingly before stepping onto the stage to introduce her. "Ladies and gentlemen, for our final performance tonight, we are delighted to present Lin Wei returning to the piano. Lynn has prepared something very special for us, an original composition of her own creation." A murmur of interest ran through the audience. Lynn's heart pounded as she walked onto the stage for the third time that evening. The grand piano waited for her, bathed in soft light. As she took her seat, Lynn noticed that the hall was even more crowded now than it had been earlier. People stood along the back wall and every seat was filled. She caught sight of Dean Wong in the front row, his expression attentive and curious. Next to him, the superintendent leaned forward slightly in her chair. These were important people who could shape Lynn's future, but strangely their presence no longer intimidated her. Tonight had taught her something about herself, that music was her true voice and it deserved to be heard. Lynn placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes briefly. She thought of her grandfather, of the stories he had told her about his childhood, of the way his eyes lit up when he spoke of finding moments of joy even in hardship. This piece was for him. The first notes rang out clearly, a simple, almost wistful melody played with the right hand alone. It was deliberately uncomplicated, like a child's song, but with an undercurrent of emotion that hinted at deeper layers to come. Lynn let the melody breathe, giving it space to fill the hall and reach the listeners' hearts. Then her left hand joined in, adding a gentle counterpoint that gave the melody context and meaning. The piece began to grow like a story unfolding. Lynn felt completely present in the moment, aware of every note, every subtle shift in dynamics and tempo. This was different from playing other people's music. This was her own voice speaking directly from her heart. As the piece developed, Lynn added complexity gradually, building themes upon themes. The playful, innocent melody from the beginning transformed, sometimes appearing in the minor key, sometimes fragmented and hesitant, but always returning stronger. It was the musical embodiment of resilience, of finding one's way through difficult times. Lynn was no longer conscious of the audience. She had entered that rare state where the musician and the music become one. Her body swayed slightly as she played, her expressions shifting with the changing moods of the piece. When she reached a particularly emotional passage, one inspired by her grandfather's story of leaving his homeland, Lynn felt tears prick at her eyes, but her fingers never faltered. The composition was taking on a life of its own, expanding beyond what Lynn had written in her notebook. She found herself adding new variations, exploring harmonies she hadn't planned, letting the music lead her where it wanted to go. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, like stepping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. Time seemed to stand still as Lynn played. The piece that was supposed to last 7 minutes stretched to 10, then 15 as she explored every facet of the emotions she had poured into it. The audience sat in rapt silence, many leaning forward in their seats, completely drawn into the musical journey. As Lynn approached what felt like the natural conclusion of the piece, she brought back the original simple melody, but now transformed by everything that had come before. It was played with a quiet confidence, a sense of having weathered storms and emerged stronger. The final notes lingered in the air, a gentle resolution that felt both satisfying and somehow open-ended, like a story that would continue beyond this moment. For several seconds after the last note faded, there was complete silence in the hall. Lynn sat motionless at the piano, slowly returning to awareness of her surroundings, almost surprised to find herself on a stage with hundreds of people watching. Then someone stood up and began to applaud. Another person followed, and another, until the entire audience was on their feet. The sound washed over Lynn like a wave, not just polite appreciation, but genuine, enthusiastic recognition. She saw Dean Wong nodding with evident approval, the superintendent wiping a tear from her eye, Mr. Reyes in the wings with his mouth slightly open in astonishment. Lynn stood and bowed, her legs shaky but her heart soaring. For the first time in her life, she had shared her true musical self with the world, and the world had embraced it. As she looked out at the continuing ovation, Lynn knew that something fundamental had changed. She had stepped onto this stage as someone told to play a simple melody, and had discovered her own voice instead. The applause seemed to go on forever. Lynn stood on the stage, her cheeks flushed, her heart racing with a mixture of relief, joy, and disbelief. She bowed a second time, then a third, as the audience continued to show their appreciation. Some people were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were smiling broadly, as if they had just witnessed something rare and precious. Mrs. Chen finally came onto the stage, beaming with pride as she took Lin's hand and addressed the crowd.
Thank you all for coming to our Community Talent Showcase.
I think we can all agree that we've witnessed something truly special tonight. She turned to Lin. And thank you, Lin Wei, for sharing your extraordinary gift with us. Lin managed a shy smile as she was led off stage. Her legs felt wobbly, and her hands were still trembling slightly from the intensity of the experience. In the wings, she was immediately surrounded by people offering congratulations. That was incredible, Mr. Reyes said, shaking his head in amazement. Why didn't you ever tell me you could compose like that? Lin shrugged, not really having an answer. How could she explain that her music had always felt too personal to share? Lin, a deep voice cut through the chatter. Everyone turned to see Dean Wong standing there, his normally serious face softened with genuine admiration. Might I have a word with you privately? The small crowd parted and Lin followed Dean Wong to a quiet corner of the backstage area. Her throat felt dry. This was the moment that could determine her future. I've been visiting schools across the state for months now, Dean Wong began, listening to countless talented young musicians. He paused, studying Lin's face. But I haven't heard anything like what you just played. Lin looked down at her hands. Thank you, sir. How long have you been composing? Since I was 10, Lin replied. But I've never performed any of my pieces before tonight. Dean Wong raised his eyebrows. Never? That was your first public performance of your own composition? Lin nodded. Remarkable. He pulled a business card from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. Our university offers a full scholarship to exceptional young musicians each year. Based on what I heard tonight, I would like to personally invite you to apply. The formal audition is just a formality in your case, I believe. Lin stared at the card, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. The State University's music program was renowned, far beyond what she had ever thought would be within her reach. The scholarship covers tuition, room and board, and includes private lessons with our faculty. Dean Wong continued. It would be a shame for talent like yours not to be nurtured properly. I don't know what to say, Lin stammered. Dean Wong smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. You don't need to say anything right now. Talk to your family. Think about it. Then call the number on that card and we'll set up the formal audition. Thank you, Lin managed, clutching the card like it might disappear if she loosened her grip. As Dean Wong walked away, Lin felt someone touch her arm. It was Grandma Wong, her eyes shining with tears. I told you, she said softly. Sometimes we just need to be brave enough to try. Lin suddenly remembered something. I need to call my mom, tell my grandfather what happened. She fumbled for her phone, but before she could make the call, Mrs. Chen approached again, accompanied by the superintendent and several other important-looking adults. Lin, I hope you don't mind, but several people would like to speak with you. The superintendent is considering a special performance at the District Arts fundraiser next month. And the local newspaper would like to do a feature on you. Lin's head spun as more and more people gathered around her, all talking at once. Her quiet life had just exploded into something unrecognizable. Part of her wanted to hide, to retreat back into the safety of anonymity. But another part, a stronger part, felt ready to embrace this new chapter. Mrs. Chen, she said finally, raising her voice slightly to be heard. I'd be happy to talk to everyone, but could I please have 5 minutes to call my family first? My grandfather is waiting to hear how everything went. Of course, dear. Take all the time you need. Mrs. Chen shooed everyone away, giving Lin space. Lin stepped into an empty practice room and closed the door. Her hands were still shaking as she dialed her mother's number. It rang twice before her mom answered. Lin, how did it go? Is Grandpa there? Can you put me on speaker? Lin asked, her voice wobbling with emotion. There was a rustling sound, then her grandfather's familiar voice, weaker than usual but still warm. Little Sparrow, I'm here. Lin took a deep breath. Grandpa, I played my composition. The one about your stories. And people liked it. They really liked it. The words tumbled out along with tears she hadn't realized were building. The university scout wants me to apply for a full scholarship. And the superintendent was crying, and everyone stood up at the end. Slow down, her grandfather chuckled. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything. Lin sank onto a piano bench and began to recount the evening's events, how she had been asked to fill in at the last minute. how one simple piece had turned into 3 performances, and how she had finally found the courage to share her own music. "I was so scared," she admitted, "but then I remembered what you always told me about music being meant to be shared. I knew you would find your courage someday," her grandfather said, his voice filled with pride. "Your grandmother would have been so happy to see this day." Lynn wiped away tears. Her grandmother had passed away when Lynn was only 8, but it was she who had first sat Lynn down at a piano, guiding her tiny fingers over the keys. "Dean Wong says the audition is just a formality," Lynn continued. "He basically offered me the scholarship right there." "Dean Wong?" Her grandfather's voice perked up. "The famous pianist who became head of the university program? He was there tonight?" "Yes. And he said he hadn't heard anything like my composition in months of searching for scholarship candidates." Even saying the words out loud felt unreal to Lynn. "Of course he hasn't," her grandfather said firmly. "Your music comes from a true place. That's something rare these days." There was a soft knock at the practice room door. Lynn looked up to see Mr. Reyes peering in apologetically. "Sorry to interrupt, but there are quite a few people waiting to speak with you," he said, "including someone from the local radio station." Lynn nodded. "I'll be right there." She turned back to the phone. "Grandpa, I have to go. There are people waiting to talk to me. Can you believe that?" "Me of all people." Her grandfather laughed. "I've always believed in you, little sparrow. Now the world is discovering what I've known all along." "I'll come straight to the hospital after we're done here," Lynn promised. "I want to tell you everything face to face." "I'll be waiting," her grandfather replied. "And Lynn, I am so very proud of you." Those words carried Lynn through the next 2 hours as she navigated a whirlwind of conversations, handshakes, and congratulations. She answered questions from the local newspaper reporter, discussed possible future performances with the superintendent, and even recorded a brief interview for the community radio station. Throughout it all, Lynn felt a strange new confidence growing within her. She had spent so many years hiding her true musical self, afraid of judgment, afraid of failure. But now that she had taken the risk of sharing her gift, doors were opening all around her. As the crowd finally began to disperse, Lynn found herself alone at the piano once more. The community center was nearly empty now, with just a few volunteers cleaning up. She sat down on the bench and lightly touched the keys, not playing, just feeling their cool, smooth surface beneath her fingertips. "You look different," said a voice. Lynn looked up to see May, the violinist from her school, carrying a stack of programs. "Different how?" Lynn asked me, considered for a moment. "Like you finally know who you are." The words resonated deeply with Lynn. That was exactly how she felt. Like she had discovered a part of herself that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. "I never thought I'd say this," Lynn admitted, "but I can't wait to perform again. I have so many other pieces I want to share." May smiled. "Well, you might get your chance sooner than you think. Mr. Reyes is already talking about featuring you in the spring concert at school. And I overheard Mrs. Chen mentioning something about a special showcase for young composers at the Performing Arts Center downtown." Lynn shook her head in disbelief. "This morning, my biggest worry was whether I could play a simple melody for the choir without messing up." And now you're on your way," May said, squeezing Lynn's shoulder before continuing with her cleanup duties. Left alone again, Lynn gently played a few notes, the beginning of a new composition that had been forming in her mind even as she performed earlier. This one felt different from her previous works. It was more confident, more joyful, infused with the exhilaration of finally being heard. As the notes echoed in the nearly empty hall, Lynn thought about the journey ahead, the scholarship audition, the new opportunities, the chance to develop her musical voice even further. There would be challenges, certainly, moments of doubt and fear, but she had crossed the most difficult threshold already, stepping out of the shadows and into the light of her own making. Lynn played the new melody again, adding harmony this time, letting it grow organically. She was no longer just a girl who had been told to play a simple melody. She was a composer, a performer, an artist finding her place in the world. And this was just the beginning of her song. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the gentle hum of the oxygen tank. Lynn sat beside her grandfather's bed, holding his thin hand in hers. Despite his frail appearance, his eyes were bright with pride as he listened to her recount every detail of the evening's performances. And then Dean Wong said he hadn't heard anything like my composition in months, Lynn said, still amazed by her own story. Can you believe it, Grandpa? All those years of hiding my music and now… Her grandfather squeezed her hand. I always told you, didn't I? Your music was never meant to stay hidden. Lynn nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. Her grandfather had been her first teacher, her biggest supporter, the one who had recognized her talent long before she did. He had never pushed her to perform. He understood her shyness too well, but he had always gently encouraged her to share her gift when she was ready. Wish you could have been there, she whispered. But I was, he replied, tapping his chest weakly. Right here. I could almost hear the music through your mother's excited phone calls. A nurse poked her head into the room. Just a few more minutes, please. Mr. Wei needs his rest. Lynn nodded and turned back to her grandfather. I'm playing at the District Arts fundraiser next month. And the formal scholarship audition is in 2 weeks, though Dean Wong says it's just a formality. You'll play your own compositions? Her grandfather asked. Yes. I'm thinking of expanding the piece I played tonight, the one about your stories, and maybe that new one I started last week about the changing seasons. Her grandfather's eyes crinkled with his smile. Good, very good. He looked tired now, his eyelids growing heavy. Promise me something, little sparrow? Anything, Lynn said. No matter what happens, scholarships, concerts, fame, never lose that honesty in your music. Play from your heart, always. I promise, she whispered, leaning down to kiss his forehead. As she left the hospital, Lynn felt both exhausted and exhilarated. The events of the day had changed something fundamental in her life, shifting her path in ways she was only beginning to understand. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Lynn found herself at the center of a small whirlwind of attention. The local newspaper ran a feature about her, complete with a photo of her at the piano. Her school principal asked her to perform at the next assembly. Classmates who had barely noticed her before now stopped her in the hallways to talk about music and composing. Through it all, Lynn continued to visit her grandfather daily, playing recordings of her practice sessions on her phone so he could hear how her compositions were developing. His health remained fragile, but his spirit stayed strong, especially when they talked about music. The day of the formal scholarship audition arrived. Lynn wore the new dress her mother had insisted on buying for the occasion, deep blue with tiny silver buttons down the back. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style that made her look older, more serious, more like the pianist she was becoming. The university's music building was imposing, all gleaming wood and polished stone. Lynn followed signs to the recital hall where the auditions were being held. As she approached the door, she heard piano music from inside, another applicant performing. The playing was technically perfect, every note precisely in place. Lynn paused to listen, a flutter of nervousness returning. What if her own playing wasn't technical enough? What if the judges preferred perfection over emotion? Lin Wei. Dean Wong appeared beside her in the hallway, a warm smile on his face. Right on time. Lynn nodded, suddenly unable to speak. Now that the moment was here, all her old fears threatened to return. Dean Wong seemed to sense her anxiety. Remember, he said gently, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for voice, for something unique and true, like what you shared at the community center. The door to the recital hall opened, and a tall boy with carefully styled hair emerged, looking pleased with himself. Dean Wong nodded to him and then gestured for Lynn to enter. Inside, the hall was smaller than Lynn had imagined, with only about 50 seats facing a grand piano on a raised platform. 3 people sat in the front row, an elderly man with white hair, a middle-aged woman with glasses, and a younger man with a neatly trimmed beard. The judges. This is Lin Wei, Dean Wong announced, guiding her to the center of the room. The young composer I told you about. The 3 judges looked at her with interest. The woman with glasses smiled encouragingly. What will you be playing for us today, Ms. Wei? Asked the elderly man. Lin took a deep breath. I'll be performing 2 original compositions. The first is called Grandfather's Stories, and the second is a new piece called After the Storm. She moved to the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment she closed her eyes, centering herself the way her grandfather had taught her. Then she began to play. The first piece was familiar now, though she had expanded certain sections and refined others. As she played, Lynn thought of her grandfather in his hospital room, of the stories he had told her that had inspired this music. She poured those memories into every note, letting the music speak of love and history, of hardship and resilience. When she transitioned to the second piece, Lynn felt a new confidence guiding her hands. This composition was different, more complex, more mature. She had written it in the days following her breakthrough performance, capturing the feeling of stepping into a new world after a lifetime of hiding. Lynn lost herself in the music, forgetting the judges, forgetting the scholarship, forgetting everything except the pure joy of sharing what was in her heart. When the final notes faded away, she opened her eyes to find all three judges leaning forward in their seats, their faces showing the same rapt attention she had seen in the audience at the community center. There was a moment of silence. Then the woman with glasses said simply, "Thank you, Ms. Wei, that was extraordinary." The formal letter arrived a week later, but Lynn already knew what it would say. Dean Wang had called her personally the evening after the audition to inform her that the scholarship was hers, a full 4-year ride to study piano performance and composition at the university. "We've never had a student quite like you," he had said. "Your technical skills need refinement, certainly, but your compositional voice is remarkable for someone so young." Now, as she sat beside her grandfather's bed reading the letter aloud to him, Lynn felt a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place. Her grandfather's eyes shone with unshed tears as he listened. "I always knew," he whispered. "From the first day I showed you how to play a C major scale, I knew your hands were meant for more than simple melodies." 6 months later, Lynn stood backstage at the state's Performing Arts Center, waiting to make her debut in the Young Artists Showcase. So much had changed in such a short time. Her grandfather had passed away peacefully just 2 weeks after she received the scholarship letter, but not before hearing her play her newest composition, a piece that celebrated his life and all he had given her. Now that piece was part of tonight's program. From a shy girl who hid her music from the world, Lynn had transformed into a performer who had discovered the joy of sharing her gift. Her new piano teacher at the university had helped her refine her technique without losing the emotional honesty that made her playing special. She had even started a small composition club at her high school, encouraging other young musicians to find their own voices. 5 minutes. "Ms. Wei," a stagehand called. Lynn nodded, straightening the jacket of her performance outfit. She could hear the murmur of the audience through the heavy curtains. Somewhere out there sat her mother, Mr. Reyes, Mrs. Chen, Grandma Wang, and many others who had been part of her journey. She thought of her grandfather, too, and how he would always be present in her music. As she walked onto the stage and took her place at the piano, Lynn remembered that night 6 months ago when she had been told to play a simple melody as a last-minute replacement. How terrified she had been. How certain that she would fail or be forgotten. Instead, that night had been the beginning of everything. The night she had stopped hiding and started becoming the musician she was meant to be. Lynn placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Her music filled the concert hall, reaching out to touch the hearts of everyone listening. It was no longer just her voice, her story. It had become something bigger, a gift she could share with the world. And as the music soared, Lynn knew that this was just the beginning of her journey. There would be challenges ahead, certainly, moments of doubt and struggle, but she would face them with the knowledge that she had already overcome the greatest obstacle of all, her own fear. Lin Wei, who had once been told to play a simple melody, had found her own song at last, and it was beautiful.